خليني فراني مفيوتني بشيرين ببنفماي ثواب ونوتي نوات أمين. This is our first Coptic lesson class. The reason I started doing this is there's a lot of tutorials that are in Arabic. However, none of them are actually as a good video in Coptic. And there are not enough tutors and not enough like many servants in the church who will probably teach you Coptic from basics. Why do I like Coptic or why do we learn Coptic? First of all, Coptic is, let's actually get the root of the word Coptic. Coptic is the anglicized word of the Arabic word Copt, which is actually the Arabic version of the Greek word Egyptos, which you can see Egyptos, eventually like Gypt or Egypt. And that comes from the origin, from the very old word in the very ancient Egyptian language. Is the word is Hikoptah, which means the land of the god Ptah, which was I think one of the gods back in the Egyptian times. Eventually, the word Coptic or Copt used by the Arabs are used to distinct between the native Egyptians who were all Coptic at this time. Egypt was all Christians, and between the native Arabs who came with the Arab conquest to Egypt, with Amr ibn al-As in the 600s ish. So that's the origin of the word Coptic. The reason I personally like Coptic, or the reason people get to learn Coptic, is there's two reasons for it. The first, the most popular reason would be mainly for the hymns. Simply, most of our hymns are in Coptic, because this is the language that I was written to. This is the original language that we've been singing all church stuff. It doesn't make it a holy language by any means. It's not a holy language. However, it's just the language that the Coptic church have always used, and because we say we're in a traditional church, we've maintained the tradition of the church. We've also maintained the liturgical hymns of the church and the liturgical text, which was all written in Coptic. And eventually, afterwards, stuff were being written both in Coptic and Arabic. However, and eventually, over time, Arabic became the most dominant language. Even in the Coptic literature, or like the literature of the Copts. However, it's been always Coptic as the main reference to us. And even if we come up with hopefully if we have a Coptic English translation of the Bible, it will be based off the Coptic translation. The Katamars in Arabic is even, I think, a translation of the Coptic translation of the Bible. The reason Coptic is highly valued because it's the one of the very early translation of the Bible from Greek. So if you have a word in Greek that has more than one meaning and you're not sure what meaning is, the Copts, who were the very first Christians and the theologians of the church, and were even the best, I would say, like one of the most prominent doctors, most prominent theologians of the early church were mostly Alexandrians from the Church of Alexandria, so which were Coptic, spoke Coptic next to their Greek. So they could have the proper and apostolic understanding of the text that they had in hand. So that's when it comes to hymns. Also, it helps people who want to learn hymns because once you understand what the thing what it actually means, it makes memorization, first of all, more fruitful. You're actually singing and praising with the heart and with the mind. So even though yes, the tune is amazing and the hymn is amazing, but you still understand what you're actually saying. So you're not just saying gibberish. You're actually speaking a language to God, or talking to God in a sense that you understand. You might not understand every single word and even the structure of the sentence, but at least when you sing the word like Tishori, when you say Tishori in Nubin Katharos or Taishori, you understand like I'm talking about the censer, I'm talking about the gold, and I'm talking about the pure gold, things like that. And it makes memorization the hymns way easier because once you understand the sentence, you can actually make up the sentence yourself. Let's say it's like you're stuck. It's a feast of resurrection. You forgot of Ashkor, of Tonf, or of E, or of Musf. Like you have no idea. But if you understand that of Tonf means you've risen and you're in the Pentecost, you understand. Okay, I mean it is of Tonf. Not just memorization. It makes less memorization because you actually understand what you're saying. So that's when it comes to hymns, which is the most popular usage for the Coptic in our church. The second usage, which what I personally get to lean to, is a matter of national identity. If someone asks me who I am, like what's your ethnic background, they just say I'm Coptic. So Coptic simply makes you distinct that you are your pharaohs are your ancestor, you are a descendant of the pharaohs. So it comes with like from a historical perspective, you've pretty much taught taught civilization to the entire world back from the pharaohs and onwards, and you've even taught them Christianity. The Church of Alexandria and all the ecumenical council that the church believes in were all chaired and were all headed by Alexandrian patriarchs. The School of Alexandria was I think the first and was the most prominent school for Christian literature. Origin of Alexandria, who was the dean of the School of Alexandria, is actually the first one to put a systematic literature or a systematic theological writing for the Christian theology. Even though it's during the persecution time before the golden age of the Church of Alexandria was known to be like pretty much the top church and the largest church in terms of understanding and philosophy because of the Egyptians that were there, and because also Alexandria was the center of the Hellenistic culture. The Library of Alexandria that existed, I think it was burnt. Well, there are different theories when it was burnt. Part of it, I think, when the Arabs came, and they actually one of the historians will say that the Arabs burnt the Library of Alexandria and took the papers, and they actually used to cook on those papers. Like they just use it as fire or flame for their fire. And there are actually some scientists that said we would have landed the moon way earlier if the Library of Alexandria has existed. And the Library of Alexandria was part also like it would come with the School of Alexandria, which was not only teaching theology but also all kind of science, so astronomy. That's why actually the Alexandrians were probably the best in astronomy, and they were the one in charge with like dating one as Easter and one as Christmas because it's based on astronomical calculations, and also other science such as like science and philosophy and medicine and whatever you name it, and also philosophy. I think Clement of Alexandria is the one that says philosophy is not mutually exclusive with Christianity, and you can actually, or the Greek philosophy per se, and you can actually put them together and they work harmoniously. The Greek philosopher were always seeking the truth, and then Christianity is telling you Christ, the person of Christ, is the truth that you've been looking for. So and also keep in mind you're Coptic, or you're a Copt. That's a better word for it. You're a Copt. The language is your identity. When you say someone is French, you see them like speaking French. If you go to Quebec, because they understand that they're French, they keep everything in French. Even the word smartphone now, they have like think like portable intelligent. They want to maintain everything in French. There's even a French police that make sure that everything is in French because they understand and everyone understands that your language is your identity. It's your language that gives your identity, and our identity is one of probably the most proudful identity. You can be proud of your identity. Being Coptic is something that, from a historical perspective, theological perspective, throughout history, the Copts were always a thing. People always knew about the Coptic Church, and the Copts in general. So it's the language that gives us the identity. You may not want to speak you don't have to speak the language at home, and you probably, if you live in the West, you want to be Canadian or American or whatever. However, even with being a Western person or American and Canadian, that doesn't say you don't have to be. It doesn't. Like you forgot about your roots. Like you always know. Like there's like China. There is like little Italy. There is like Chinatown. There is the Greek town. There's always like people still. They live in the West with the Western culture. However, they still don't forget their roots because they understand that their roots is something big. And surely, as Copts, our roots are something that's big for us. It's big. You don't need to speak Coptic at home at some point, but the idea that you're aware of there's a Coptic language, the Coptic understanding, you can probably at least read some Coptic and just familiarize yourself with what your ancestors that have brought you for where you are now pretty much used to speak or used to identify themselves as Copt, which comes the Coptic language. Regarding the Coptic dialects, there were many of them. There's the Sahidic one, there's the Bohairic one, there's the Akhmimic, there is Alexandrian. Pretty much not a lot of them exist right now, except in some literature. The Alexandrian is used in some the Alexandrian dialect is used in some Alexandrian churches in Alexandrian Egypt. Not sure how widely it's used, but I know it's used a little bit. The Akhmimic one is used mainly in some old writings. The Sahidic one is actually what comes from the word Sa'id. Is the one that's been most extensively used in the literature. So most people who are actually Coptic scholars or scholars in the Coptology would focus more on the Sahidic one, simply because it's the Sa'id it's in Upper Egypt, which is south of Egypt. It's upper, but it's south, simply because it's like Egypt is like it's going up on a hill. That's how actually the Nile flows. The Nile flows from up to down, so it goes from south to north. So Upper Egypt is now that is south. That's where the Arabs haven't reached their influence. There were more Copts living in Upper Egypt than in Lower Egypt, which is the Delta region. Simply because the north is more close to where the Arabs governor used to live, so it's more influential. And also, if you know about, like, let's say the Barshmur revolt, which at some point then the Copts, especially in the north, decided to go for independence and have their own country and just gain independence from from the Islamic Caliphate back then. So the Islamic Caliphate thing came from Baghdad all the way. I think they just like killed all of them. Not all of them. Some of them were sold as slaves in Syria and Iraq. So that's why you actually see a lot of more in Sa'id. Like most of it, even the persecution, the trouble that happened to Copts would happen more in Upper Egypt because there are more Copts. So there are more targets. In Lower Egypt, which is in northern, like in Delta region, there will be less Coptic density because they're all like, they pretty much just they were treated badly. So when you go south, I think Coptic even used to survive as a language, probably as a spoken language or at least language of literature, as like used as like known by an average Copt up until the 17th century. So there is more from the Saidic dialect. The dialects aren't that different. It's like I would say it's like more rather than English. I wouldn't say it's like British and American English, but rather like let's say Syrian Arabic and Egyptian Arabic, or Egyptian Arabic and any other country Arabic that you would be able to understand easily. But it's not exactly the same. Some letters are pronounced differently. Like we would pronounce the Saidic, the Bohairic would pronounce like the ph, the f or f. The Saidic would use a p instead, so like f and p. Things like that, very minor, A and E. Very minor, but you can still understand them. It's not exactly the same, but you can still understand them. However, the dialect that we use in the Coptic Church now is the Bohairic dialect. That was a dialect that existed in the monasteries after the Coptic language was no longer the main language in Egypt. It's the monasteries that maintain the Coptic text and the Coptic literature writing in Coptic. They are the one who, thank God, has maintained, like, the monasticism is actually the one that maintained the tradition and the tradition of the Coptic church. That's even in every church. It's the monasticism that managed to maintain the tradition and the culture of the church. So it's the dialect that was used in the used in the monastery was the Bohairic, simply because like near the Bahr or Buhaira, which is like north, when Wadi Natrun, that's where the monasteries are. That's where the theologians or the writers or people using the Coptic literature existed. So by the time that when the church wanted to get back to use the Copt again, revive the Coptic language, the people who were using language were mostly the monasteries, and the monasteries was using the Bohairic dialect. So the Bohairic dialect became the standard and the official dialect of the Coptic Orthodox Church right now. So that's a brief introduction about the Coptic in general. Very, very brief introduction. Starting the next lesson, I'll start introducing probably, I'll go in actually very, very small steps and very small lessons to explain the letters. They're not going to be in order. They're grouped and sorted by how they look or how they're pronounced or if they come from English origin. It's a bit different. We translated this we translated this at the church in Vancouver. However, a greater translation has been done for this curriculum by the Church of St. Mary and St. Athanasius in Mississauga, and it's all based on the Coptic curriculum of the Church of St. Mary and St. Athanasius and Medinat Nasr. They're two different churches. They're not affiliated, but that's how the stuff came from. And I'll start next video. Thank you, and see you there.